If you're a runner in your 50s and up, wondering if a super trainer is right for you, you're in the right place. This is episode 2 of our comprehensive guide to the best super trainers for runners over 50. Episode 1 provides a primer on what exactly a super trainer is, followed by pros and cons specifically for folks 50 and up. In episode 2, which you're watching now, we shine a light on our top picks from across the super trainer category for runners over 50 and discuss the types of runners most likely to enjoy each pick. And finally, in episode 3, we highlight 4 honorable mentions, shoes that might not work for as broad an audience as our top picks, but could be brilliant for runners with specific preferences or needs. Assuming I've set this all up correctly, when you reach the end of one episode, YouTube should automatically start playing the next in the series. That said, if you want to jump to a specific episode, I've included direct links to each in the description below. For example, if you don't know what a super trainer is, you're more than welcome to jump on over to episode 1 now to get that context. This episode will still be here for you afterward. And speaking of jumping, each individual episode is also organized into chapters, any of which you can jump to directly using your video player. So after watching this intro, you don't have to repeat it when watching episodes 1 or 3. Welcome to We Run Over 50, where it's our mission to inspire more people over 50 to become runners over 50. My name is Ernest, and as you might have guessed, I am a runner over 50. I've also worked in and around the athletic footwear industry for over 2 decades, with most of that time focused on running. That said, I am not a doctor, and the content on this channel is for informational and educational purposes only, and does not constitute medical advice. Please see the description below for our full disclaimer, and while you're down there, we'd be forever grateful if you were to like and subscribe. Or better yet, join our community on Patreon, where members get access to exclusive content, including ad-free videos, Q&A videos, shoe report cards, and more. You'll find that link below as well. All right, let's get back to super trainers. Over the past year, I've been lucky enough to have had the opportunity to run in a lot of shoes, including most of the leading super trainers on the market today. For this guide, I look back at all of them, in excess of 50 models from across a dozen different brands, and rated them against 2 criteria. First, is the shoe a super trainer? That may sound like an easy question to answer, but because there's no single governing body out there defining these sorts of things, there's no one universally accepted definition of what exactly a super trainer is. My definition is based on 3 questions. First, does the shoe incorporate the key ingredients of a super trainer? I won't go into this in detail here because we cover it in the first episode, but in short, the ingredients are a super foam that stores and releases energy like a battery, and a geometry that maximizes that battery's capacity through its height, as well as its efficiency through a rockered shape. What's not required is a stiffening plate, whether it's made of nylon, carbon fiber, or some other material. A plate can be beneficial in a super racing shoe to give you that last little bit of added energy savings, but it's not a requirement for a super trainer. If anything, I found that plates tend to diminish the overall versatility of super trainers. All right, so that's question 1. Question 2, is the shoe lightweight? Our ceiling for lightweight is 8.9 ounces in a US men's size 9. And for the purposes of this guide, any candidate shoe had to be at or below that weight to qualify as a super trainer. Finally, does the shoe offer extraordinary versatility? As we discussed in episode 1, the catalyst for the rapid rise of super trainers was their unprecedented capacity to deliver at or near best-in-class performance across the spectrum of run types. If you've seen episode 1, you'll remember the chart I talked through to illustrate this point. Super trainers offer pace and lightweight rivaling that of performance trainers, and even give super shoes a run for their money. They also offer comfort that rivals that of max cushion trainers and durability that rivals that of daily trainers. A super trainer could, in theory, be your one shoe to rule them all. These are the questions that help me determine whether a candidate was or was not a super trainer. For example, the Nike Vomero Plus does include the key ingredients of a super trainer, but at 9.9 ounces in the US Men's 9, it's not lightweight, and that in turn limits its versatility. While I continue to rate the Vomero Plus as one of the best max cushion daily trainers on the market today, it's not a super trainer. Another example is the much buzzed about Adidas Adizero Evo SL. This shoe qualifies in terms of its ingredients and its weight, but with important nuances of its construction and geometry skewing the shoe towards speed, it lacks the versatility required of a super trainer. Again, like the Vomero Plus, I rate the Evo SL as one of the best performance trainers on the market today, but it's not a super trainer. So, is the shoe a super trainer was our first criterion, and it helped us narrow the field down from 50 plus to a dozen. Our second criterion was how well those 12 remaining candidates delivered against our needs as runners over 50. Specifically, the reduced elasticity in our tendons, and especially our Achilles tendon, and our need for increased cushioning set against our diminished sense of balance, and finally, our changing feet. As discussed in episode 1, in some respects, super trainers seem like they're tailor-made for our needs, while in others, they run counter to them. So this criterion wasn't quite as black and white as the first, by which I mean for the remaining candidates, I frequently found myself weighing significant pros in one area against potentially significant cons in another. But after a lot of running and even more analysis, 4 candidates rose to the top. Those are the shoes highlighted in this video. And to give you some visibility into our process, I'll share a report card for each pick, so you can see how I characterized each shoe vis-a-vis our needs as runners over 50. Finally, for your convenience, I've included links to reputable retailers where you can purchase our picks in the description below. But I want to emphasize that I purchased all of the shoes in this guide with my own money, and the opinions I express are mine and mine alone. Also, I have no financial relationship with any of the sites I've linked to. Those links are genuinely just for your convenience. All right, with all that context out of the way, let's get to our picks. Starting with the shoe from a Chinese startup whose name might sound funny, but whose first super trainer is already making waves big enough to reach across the Pacific. The company is called Dynafish, and the shoe is called the Xiaonian, or if you're in the US, the Dyna Super. Now, even though I'm in the US, I'm going to continue to use the shoe's global name of Xiaonian because it's more broadly recognized. For example, if you wanted to see more reviews of the shoe, you'd get better results by searching for Xiaonian as compared to Dyna Super. All right, so Dynafish is by far the youngest brand in this roundup, having started up just 2 years ago in 2024. But it's not a garage-based selling shoes out of the back of your station wagon sort of startup. Instead, it's part of a state-backed incubator program based in a city called Tianjin that's just a short bullet train ride southeast of Beijing. The company was founded by a footwear designer who recognized that the best design in the world is useless if you can't produce it. So from the outset, Dynafish aligned itself with a manufacturing partner that offered deep expertise in high-performance foams. The company has also smartly leveraged social media to cultivate a devoted following amongst geeky runners in China. And this following is so strong that their initial release of the Xiaonian, which was just this past October, sold out within an hour. So while Dynafish may be young, they've built up a powerful head of steam. Now, coming back to the name, I don't speak Chinese, but as I understand it, the company's name in China is Danian, which translates to big catfish. I know that in China, the catfish is a symbol of wealth and prosperity, and that may be the rationale for the name. But given the company's roots in China's modern startup scene, my sense is that the true inspiration for the name stems from a business concept that's become popular in China, something called the catfish effect. In a nutshell, the catfish effect describes what happens when a hungry predator, the catfish, is introduced to a stagnant market filled with slow-moving sardines. In this scenario, the aptly named Dynafish, with its singular focus on high-performance, high-value running shoes, is the hungry catfish. While the legacy brands, particularly Adidas and Nike, which had gorged on the Chinese market for decades, are the slow-moving sardines. Everything I've seen of Dynafish's approach to their market and their products tells me that this hungry catfish amongst the sluggish sardines idea is what drives them and underpins their name. Okay, so interesting name, but what about the shoe? Well, in one sentence, the Dynafish Xiaonian is the best entry point to the world of super trainers. It offers all the performance you'd expect from a shoe in this category while retailing for far less. I'll talk more about the specifics of how to buy the shoe in just a bit, but the Xiaonian has an MSRP of $130. If you haven't checked in on the running shoe market for a while, that might not strike you as noteworthy, but it represents a remarkable value. Consider that the going rate these days for a no-frills daily trainer is about $150. And if that strikes you as a bit rich, hold on to your butts, because the starting price for super trainers these days is $200, and that's the starting price. So in the Xiaonian, you're getting all the performance of a super trainer for significantly less than its category peers, and for even less than the price of a basic daily trainer. To me, this makes the Xiaonian a no-brainer for anyone who's been super trainer curious, but has been put off by the cost of entry. I want to emphasize, though, that the Dynafish Xiaonian isn't here just because it's cheap. It's on our list of the best super trainers for runners over 50 because it's a phenomenal running shoe. It's not perfect, and its foibles may be showstoppers for some, but the combination of performance and value offered by the shoe make it a uniquely compelling proposition. All right, let's start with weight. The Xiaonian is the lightest shoe amongst our picks. As I mentioned earlier, one of our requirements to qualify as a super trainer is that a shoe must weigh in below 9 ounces in the US men's size 9. That's our threshold for lightweight. As a consequence, all of the shoes in this guide are, at the very least, light. But at 6.8 ounces, the Xiaonian qualifies as not just light, but feathery, and is even lighter than several of today's leading marathon racing shoes. Oftentimes, ultra lightweight comes with compromises in comfort and protection, but I did not find that to be the case with the Xiaonian. Speaking of comfort and protection, the shoe offers a lot of foam underfoot. To be specific, the Xiaonian has a very high heel stack height of 41 millimeters, combined with a moderate 7 millimeter heel ball offset, and a true full-length rocker that curves up aggressively through the forefoot. The net effect of all this is a ride that just feels effortless. My notes after my first run in the shoe were, and this is verbatim, "Holy cow, feels so fast and natural in a way that only a mono foam shoe can." To clarify that last bit, the Xiaonian is the only shoe amongst our picks that features a one-piece midsole. Well, we'll get into this as we dive into our other picks, but many super trainers feature multi-part variable hardness midsoles to help balance the dueling needs for cushioning and stability. But the Xiaonian keeps things simple with a monolithic block of foam underfoot. To my feet, that foam, which is a true high-performance super foam, started out feeling a bit firm, but softened noticeably by about mile 3 of my first run, which was an easy run at a steady pace. But then I noticed something interesting during a subsequent 10-mile progression run, where I started easy and gradually increased my pace. The foam seemed to change character based on the rate at which I loaded it. When I was running easy, I describe it as feeling fairly soft. But as I upped my pace, it became increasingly responsive and springy. This rate responsiveness is a big factor in the Xiaonian's versatility. It enables the shoe to offer the sort of forgiving ride you want when you're running easy, and the sort of springy ride you want when you pick up the pace. Now, as impressed as I was by the Xiaonian's midsole foam, what I absolutely fell in love with was its geometry. The shoe's aggressive full-length rocker made turning over my legs feel so easy, and as I said earlier, effortless. In fact, the rocker in the Xiaonian is so aggressive that the shoe's midsole is actually thicker under the midfoot than it is under the heel. This creates a sort of roll-through effect that, in my experience, reduces loading on key structures of the lower leg and foot. For starters, the curved heel rocker slows the rate of plantar flexion through initial contact, this rotation of your foot toward the ground. As a consequence, the muscle that runs along the front of your shin and contracts to slow down plantar flexion doesn't have to work as hard. And this contributes to that effortless stride I've highlighted, while also helping reduce your risk of developing shin splints. Then, as you move through mid-stance and propulsion, the aggressive forefoot rocker allows you to literally roll through toe-off, reducing the work your Achilles and calf have to do to lift your heel and propel your body forward. This is hugely beneficial to us runners over 50 because it reduces loading at the Achilles, where we lose capacity as we age. And as I highlighted in the first episode in this guide, reducing the need for energy generation at the ankle joint also meaningfully reduces the total energy cost of running at a given pace. Put simply, the Xiaonian's aggressive rocker makes it easier to run. Now, and another important aspect of the shoe's midsole geometry is its width. As you can see, it has a broad base, including across the midfoot. This width, combined with the fact that the midsole maintains ground contact under the arch, enables the shoe to provide a reassuringly natural, supportive feel. Moving to the upper and fit, the Dynafish Xiaonian is unusual amongst Chinese domestic market shoes in that it offers a very generous fit. I describe it as true to size for length, but more voluminous around the ball of the foot and midfoot than your average medium-width shoe. This is obviously a plus for those with wide and high-volume feet, but could be problematic for you narrow footers out there. And adding to your challenge is the Xiaonian's cramped U-throat opening. As you can see, its lace loops are very closely set, which limits the degree to which you can cinch down its upper if you have a narrow foot. On a related note, Dynafish has adopted a business practice that influences the fit of the Xiaonian in a pretty big way. In their home market, they offer a premium sock liner or insole for an additional charge of a little over $10 US. I should note that this premium sock liner is not yet available through Dynafish's official US distributor, and I don't know if it'll ever be officially offered here. So we can't get it, yet its existence still affects us. What do I mean? Well, if you've ever replaced the stock sock liners in a pair of shoes with prescription or over-the-counter inserts, you may have noticed that those new inserts affected the way your shoes fit. That's because all shoes are designed with a specific sock liner thickness in mind. At Nike, we called this the sock liner allowance. So let's say a shoe was designed around a 5mm sock liner allowance. It would stand then that that shoe would be sold with a 5mm thick sock liner. But if, for some reason, it was instead sold with a, let's say, 2mm thick sock liner, less than half of the intended sock liner allowance, the shoe would no longer fit the way it was designed to. That's because there'd be more empty space within the upper, space that should have been taken up by a thicker sock liner. And that's exactly what's happening with the Dynafish Xiaonian. The premium sock liner that the company sells is 5mm thick. And it's very obvious to me that the shoe's upper was designed around a 5mm sock liner allowance. And yet, for some reason, the stock sock liner that comes with the shoe is only 2mm thick. You can see it here. It's quite remarkably thin. This is why the shoe's fit is so unusually generous, really to the point of being sloppy. It's meant to be worn with a sock liner that's more than twice the thickness of the one it comes with. Now, if you have wide or high volume feet, this additional space within the upper can actually be beneficial. But I think many runners are going to find the fit of the Xiaonian to be overly voluminous, which can lead to blisters and other issues that stem from excessive movement of your foot within the shoe. This isn't great, but fortunately there's a simple fix. Swap the Xiaonian stock paper-thin sock liners with the inserts from a different pair of running shoes. 4.5 to 5 millimeters is pretty much the default sock liner thickness these days, so the inserts from almost any other running shoe should do. In my case, I've replaced the Xiaonian stock inserts with the sock liners from an ASICS shoe called the Blast, which we'll actually discuss when we get to honorable mentions. Obviously, you shouldn't have to do this, and if the Xiaonian wasn't so phenomenal in so many other respects, I wouldn't suggest that you go to the trouble. But I think it is worth this little bit of hassle. Now, just the last few points to cover related to our changing feet. First, because, as we just discussed, the Xiaonian's upper seems to be designed around the standard 5mm sock liner allowance, it offers average accommodation for orthotics. And while it's only offered in a medium width, its upper is quite voluminous when worn with the shoe's stock ultra-thin inserts. So much so that I wouldn't necessarily discount the Xiaonian if you have an issue like bunions that necessitates a wider fit. Finally, I think the Xiaonian can also be a good match for folks with big toe stiffness. Like all the shoes in this guide, its midsole does not feature a plate, but by virtue of its thickness and aggressive forefoot rocker, flex at the ball of the foot is minimal. All right, moving on to attributes outside of performance. There are a few things worth noting, starting with durability. I've logged 31 miles in this pair thus far, and they're holding up well. I've noticed no degradation in cushioning, and the shoe's very thin outsole has held up remarkably well. It's made of a material process called cast polyurethane, or CPU for short. This process enables ultra-thin, ultra-lightweight outsoles that are nonetheless very grippy and very durable. It's something that's only just starting to show up on shoes from Western brands and typically only at higher price points. So this is one more example of the Xiaonian delivering outsized value. But it's not all sunshine and roses. For one thing, there's the overly voluminous fit we've already discussed, but I also had a quality issue with my right shoe. This overlay that had been bonded to the tongue has completely delaminated. Here on my left shoe, you can see how the overlay is supposed to be attached to the tongue. This happened after just one run, which tells me it was due to a manufacturing fault rather than wear and tear. But 31 miles in, nothing else has fallen off, and aside from this issue, the shoe does seem well put together. One other problem that I think merits a mention is the Xiaonian stock laces that are just terrible. For starters, they're just way too long, which leads to a lot of excess lace flopping around while you're running. But the primary problem is that the laces are too thin and slippery. They have to be double knotted or else they'll come undone during your run. But then untying that knot is an enormous pain in the you-know-what. And that's amplified when the laces are wet. I started testing the Xiaonian while it was still cold and rainy here in Oregon, and trying to untie these laces with cold, stiff fingers was incredibly frustrating. If spending minutes fussing with overly thin laces isn't your idea of fun, you can, as with the sock liners, swap in laces from another pair of shoes. This is the sort of issue I chalk up to Dynafish being such a young company. And again, replacing the laces is something you shouldn't have to do, but given that the fix for this is pretty easy, it's a hassle I was willing to put up with. Okay, that brings me to our last topic, which is how to buy these things. As of this recording in early August, Dynafish has only one authorized retailer for the Xiaonian in the US. Coincidentally, it's the retail outlet for one of my favorite running shoe tubers. His name is Ioana, and his retail site is hobbyjogger.com. I'll include a link in the description. As an authorized retailer, hobbyjogger.com maintains their inventory in the US, so your order will ship from the States with no additional charge for shipping. The Xiaonian is also available from a constellation of retailers based in China, and a popular front end to that marketplace is a site called AliExpress. Personally, I find AliExpress, where pricing can fluctuate enormously from one day to the next, a little too Wild West. But if you have the risk tolerance for it, it's an amazing resource for China market running shoes that are otherwise unavailable here in the States. There are also US-based retailers that will drop ship the Xiaonian from China to a US address. One example I've had success with is a site called Kipstorm.com, and they typically cover shipping for orders over $100 US. The only downside here is that it can take upwards of 3 weeks for your shoes to arrive. All this is why, so long as they have inventory, I'd recommend going with HobbyJogger.com. And I have no relationship, financial or otherwise, with Joanna or HobbyJogger. I just think it's going to be the safest and easiest way to get your feet into a pair of the Xiaonian. Now, speaking of which, it's worth noting that the Xiaonian is offered in a more limited size range than we're accustomed to in the West. The largest size that's currently offered at HobbyJogger.com is a US men's 12, which equates to a woman's 13.5. Maxing out at a men's 11 or 12 is pretty typical for China market brands. But thanks to the groundswell of interest in the Xiaonian from runners outside of China, the folks at Dynafish have indicated that larger sizes are coming, though I've seen no details yet as to when that might be. All right, that probably sounds like an awful lot of caveats and hoops to jump through for a running shoe from a company you've never heard of, that's only existed for 2 years, and that's based halfway around the world. Dynafish certainly is not a mainstream brand, and it's absolutely understandable if you were to decide you don't want to gamble on such an unknown quantity, especially when there are other picks in this guide that are safer bets. But if you've wanted to try a super trainer, yet have held off because of the eye-watering cost of entry set by more established brands, the Dynafish Xiaonian is a uniquely compelling proposition. So long as it's offered in your size, the Xiaonian delivers true super trainer performance with the versatility to take on everything from high-intensity speed workouts to low-intensity easy runs. And at $130 US, it retails for less than today's basic run-of-the-mill daily trainers. The Xiaonian certainly isn't the safe choice, but I believe it represents the best entry point to the super trainer category available today. All right, let's move on to the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo, which retails for $170 US. While it may not look like it, I believe the Kipstorm Tempo is the super trainer that will feel most familiar to runners who've never experienced a super trainer before. If you're based in the States, you've probably never heard of Kiprun. It's the in-house running brand for a sporting goods retailer called Decathlon that you've probably also never heard of. Based in France, Decathlon is actually the world's largest sporting goods retailer by both revenue and store count. They have stores in pretty much every major market in the world, except the US. They have made a couple of attempts to break into the US market over the years, but ultimately pulled the plug on physical stores here in 2022, though they do still operate a US-based online store. Decathlon is unique amongst big box retailers in that a huge proportion of their sales, over 80%, come from their own in-house brands. Compare that to, say, Dick's Sporting Goods, where the company's in-house brands, including Kalia and Verst, account for only about 20% of sales. Or Costco. Their in-house Kirkland Signature brand is widely known and loved, but only makes up about a third of the company's total annual sales. So a retailer the size of Decathlon generating 80% of sales from their own brands is unconventional. Another way that Decathlon's strategy around in-house brands is unique is that they actually create almost all of the products sold under the in-house labels. You see, typically an in-house brand is actually what's known in industry parlance as a private label. For example, Kirkland Signature Coffee is actually produced by Starbucks. In essence, Costco hires Starbucks to make a coffee blend exclusively for their stores, and then Costco applies their own private Kirkland Signature label to that product. Similarly, Kirkland Signature batteries are made for Costco by Duracell. In the case of Decathlon, however, all of the research, development, and design that goes into the products offered by their in-house brands is done by teams at Decathlon. Let's take, for example, Kiprun, which is Decathlon's in-house running brand. They don't hire Nike to make shoes, shirts, and equipment that they then slap their logo on. Instead, Decathlon has in-house teams of researchers, engineers, designers, product managers, and product testers dedicated to creating Kiprun gear, which is then sold in Decathlon stores. Back in the day when I was a product manager at Nike, I would have described Decathlon's running footwear as being more focused on price points than performance. But their shoes have steadily improved over the years, and now I'd say Kiprun makes footwear that rivals offerings from the leading global running brands. And we're highlighting one of those shoes, the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo. But there's just one last bit of context I want to share before getting to the shoe, which is that outside of the US, the Kiprun brand is available exclusively at Decathlon stores. And this direct-to-consumer model that bypasses third-party distributors and retailers nets Decathlon 100% of the profits from sales of Kiprun gear. That in turn gives Decathlon a lot of flexibility when it comes to pricing. Because they're not sharing a percentage of sales with anyone else, they can price Kiprun shoes below comparable offerings from traditional wholesalers, aka the ASICS, Brooks, and Nikes of the world, and still see healthy gross margins. To give you a specific example, if you were to walk into a Decathlon store in London, you'd see the shoe we're focused on here, the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo, with an MSRP equivalent to about $160 US. By comparison, the ASICS Superblast 3, which is also in this guide, sells in the UK for the equivalent of $267 US. Crazy, right? But this $100 price gap is often even wider because Decathlon regularly discounts the Kipstorm Tempo down to the equivalent of about $130 US, literally half the price of the ASICS Superblast 3. So the Kipstorm Tempo is a truly insane value at Decathlon stores. Unfortunately, as I mentioned just a minute ago, Decathlon no longer operates stores in the US. And yet they saw a big enough opportunity here that they did something pretty audacious. In April of this year, Decathlon launched Kiprun as a standalone running brand in the States. And since they don't operate any stores here, they did a complete 180 on their business strategy and adopted a traditional wholesale model in the US, starting with 3 retail partners. Those partners are Running Warehouse, which I've referenced in previous videos, Heartbreak Hill Running Company, which started in the Boston area and now operates stores in Chicago and Santa Monica, and Run More, a local running specialty store based in Westminster, Maryland. I actually purchased my pair of Kipstorm Tempos from Run More because I wanted to support an indie running store with the guts to adopt a brand that had zero name recognition in the US. I'll include a link to Run More's online store in the description. As I mentioned, they're based in Maryland, but they ship anywhere within the continental US and Hawaii. Now, because Kiprun operates on a wholesale model here, they have to share margin with their retail partners. So they can't be quite as aggressive on pricing, but they are still undercutting their competition. For example, the suggested retail price of the Kipstorm Tempo here in the States is $170. By comparison, the US MSRP for the ASICS Superblast 3 is $210. So not quite as big of a gap as you'd find at a Decathlon store in London, Paris, or Beijing, but the Kipstorm Tempo still represents a fantastic value in the super trainer segment. All right, so it's offered at a great price. But how does the Kipstorm Tempo perform for runners over 50? Starting with weight. Though it looks like a big, beefy shoe, the Kipstorm Tempo sits squarely in the light category, tipping the scales at 7.9 ounces in the US men's 9. That makes it the second lightest shoe amongst their picks, after only the feathery Dynafish Xiaonian. In terms of helping mitigate the loss of elasticity in our Achilles tendons, The Kipstorm Tempo offers a moderate heel ball offset of 8 millimeters and what I would characterize as an aggressive forefoot rocker. In photos, the midsole looks like it comes to a sharp point at the front of the shoe, which might lead you to think it's going to feel weird underfoot. But out on the road, the Kipstorm Tempo felt like a super version of a normal running shoe. And yet, that moderate heel ball offset and aggressive early stage forefoot rocker should, as we discussed in the first episode of this guide, reduce loading on your Achilles and calves. That certainly has been my experience over the 48 miles and counting I've logged in the shoe. When it comes to our need for cushioning set against our declining balance, like all of our picks, the Kipstorm Tempo has a very high heel stack height. It is worth noting, though, that in the world of super trainers, the Tempo's 43 millimeters of heel stack is by no means extreme. Instead, it's right about average for the category. And the team at Kiprun has thoughtfully engineered the shoe's midsole to counter the instability typically associated with so much stack. For starters, the midsole is based on a cutting-edge chemistry called aliphatic thermoplastic polyurethane, or ATPU for short. And it provides a remarkable blend of cushioning, resilience, durability, and lightweight. ATPU also offers a wide margin when it comes to its cushioning feel. It can be tuned to feel very soft or very firm without compromising its other qualities. In the case of the Kipstorm Tempo, the team at Kiprun has opted for a relatively firm experience that helps make the shoe feel more stable than you'd expect given its height. But they didn't stop there. The chunk of ATPU that sits directly on your foot is further stabilized by a thin, stiff layer of compression molded EVA, this component here. From the side, the EVA layer looks like it's limited to the heel, but it actually extends along the full length of the shoe's broad midsole. The net effect is an underfoot experience that feels firm on initial step-in and at slower paces, but offers more cushioning the more you put into it. It's also just fantastically springy, and as I mentioned, feels reassuringly stable, whether you're standing, walking, or running. It's this combination of a relatively firm midsole at step-in with the stability you would typically associate with a lower stack shoe that makes the Kipstorm Tempo feel more familiar than most super trainers. And I mean that in a good way. I love the flowing ride you get from the Dynafish Xiaonian and R.A.D UFO, both of which feature aggressive full-length rockers. But I know some people can't abide the sense that you're always either tipping forward or backward in those sorts of fully rockered shoes. By contrast, the Kipstorm Tempo feels well planted when you're standing and walking. It's just when you start running that the turbos kick in and the shoe comes roaring to life. All right, how about the attributes with implications for our changing feet? Well, first, when it comes to fit, since I'd never owned a Kiprun shoe prior to buying the Kipstorm Tempo, I did a lot of research on how they fit and learned that most Kiprun models fit about a half size long. So I ordered my pair of the Kipstorm Tempo in a US men's 10.5 instead of my usual size 11, and the 10.5s fit just right. I found them to be a little tight around the ball of my foot to start, but the shoe's thin upper has some give to it, and the tightness subsided after my first run. Now, I wouldn't recommend the Kipstorm Tempo to folks with severe bunions or very wide feet, but I'm a double E width and found the upper very comfortable once it broke in. It's worth noting, though, that like all of our picks, the Kipstorm Tempo is only offered in a medium width. Okay, two last fit-related quirks I want to mention. First, the Kipstorm Tempo features an unusual quasi-booty construction. Instead of being a loose component, the tongue is fixed to the collar lining. Now, the tongue does have some stretch to it, but getting your foot into the shoe can be a little bit cumbersome, especially the first few times you put it on. The booty-like construction may also result in an uncomfortably tight fit over the midfoot for folks with a very high instep. The last quirk is the Kipstorm Tempo's lacing system. The shoe features hidden eye stays, along with lace guides cut into the tongue for every row of those eye stays. The upside is you get a cleaner appearance to the upper, but this design makes adjusting the laces much more difficult than it should be. A pro tip: loosen the laces completely before you put the shoe on for the first time. I found that once my foot was in the shoe, it was nearly impossible to adjust the laces, so loosen them up first. One nice thing about the Tempo's lacing system is that the laces feature this stitching detail that gives the surface of the laces an added texture that helps them stay tied, which is a really thoughtful touch. Now, in terms of arch feel, the Kipstorm Tempo may look like it gets narrow through the arch, but that's only because the shoe's midsole is so exceptionally wide across the ball of the foot. In fact, the width of the Tempo's midsole across the narrowest part of the midfoot is comparable to that of the Brooks Ghost 18, which is recognized as offering stability that works for a wide range of runners. This width, combined with the Tempo's dual foam setup and the midsole's ground contact geometry along both sides of the foot, helps prevent excessive collapse under the arch without feeling overly stiff or controlling. When it comes to orthotics, the Kipstorm Tempo features a removable sock liner with a thickness right around 4.5 millimeters, which is stock standard, and consequently the shoe offers average orthotic accommodation. Now, I already mentioned that I don't think the Kipstorm Tempo is a good match for folks with bunions or very wide feet, but I do think it can be a good choice for runners with big toe stiffness or hallux rigidus, so long as the upper is wide enough for you. Even though the Tempo's midsole does not incorporate a stiffening plate, its thickness, combined with its aggressive forefoot rocker and the reinforcing layer of EVA, keep flex under the ball of the foot to a minimum. I mentioned right at the start of this review that the Kipstorm Tempo is the super trainer that will feel most familiar to runners who've never experienced a super trainer before. That also makes it the super trainer that I found the easiest to recommend, because I'm confident it'll work for a wide range of runners without causing extreme sticker shock. Smaller, lighter runners may not be able to fully engage its cushioning, but they'll still appreciate the Tempo's bounce, smooth rocker, and lightweight. Bigger runners, on the other hand, are sure to love the shoe's copious cushioning and confidence-inspiring support, while also being amazed that the Tempo can offer so much protection with so little weight. The one shortcoming I experienced from a performance perspective was that the Tempo's midsole started feeling harsh underfoot on longer outings. As I mentioned, I've logged a total of 48 miles in the shoe thus far across 4 runs, and in all of them, the shoe felt genuinely amazing through the initial miles. But 2 of those runs were long runs of 20 and then 14 miles. And in both cases, the midsole seemed to lose its cush once I hit about the 9 to 10 mile mark. Thanks to the shoe's fantastic geometry, it remained highly runnable, but my feet weren't loving it. I will say, though, that in the case of the 14-mile run, I picked up my pace through the last few miles, and that seemed to resurrect the Tempo's cushioning. So I would describe it as a shoe that rewards pace. It'll feel great through your first 8 to 9 miles regardless, but once you get into the double digits, its ride may start to stiffen unless you give it some juice. And really, this is only an issue if you regularly do runs in excess of 10 miles. All right, so the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo is a truly versatile super trainer that's well suited to the needs of runners over 50. It has some wonkiness, particularly around its tongue and lacing system, and it does fit about a half size long, but on the whole, the shoe delivers a finely tuned balance of performance and protection. It's also a phenomenal value at its MSRP of $170. It may not match the Dynafish Xiaonian on price or the Superblast 3 on softness, but I'd classify the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo as the best choice in this guide for bigger runners, and really anyone who prefers a firmer, steadier underfoot experience. That takes us to the R.A.D UFO, which retails for $200. Some folks spend their entire lives trying to prove the truth is out there, but it only takes one run in the UFO to recognize that the truth is in here. That said, you won't want to stop at just one run because out of all our picks, the R.A.D UFO delivers the most smiles per mile. Now, unless you're pretty well immersed into the world of athletic shoes, you probably haven't heard of R.A.D, which stands for Rally Against Destruction of the Mind, Body, and Planet. As company founder Ben Massey explained in an interview with Huckberry, the company's name is, quote, the internal mantra that drives us to challenge the status quo of what a footwear company can be, unquote. Massey, who is a former CrossFit athlete based out of the UK, founded the company in 2019 to create footwear that delivers best-in-class performance while recognizing that athletes today aren't just one-dimensional drones driven by a no pain, no gain, win-at-all-cost mentality. To help realize this vision, Massey recruited footwear industry veteran Tom Barron to lead design and innovation for the nascent brand. And together they launched R.A.D's first shoe, a CrossFit-focused trainer called the R.A.D 1 in 2022. By all accounts, that shoe was a huge success, and R.A.D leveraged their momentum in the training space to launch a running shoe line in late 2025, starting with the shoe we're highlighting here, the R.A.D UFO. As you might have gathered already, R.A.D isn't a company that believes in half measures, and the UFO is an incredibly audacious and successful first foray into performance running. My Goth Black colorway is the most conservative they offer, and I only went this way because I ordered my pair in winter, which is very rainy here in the Pacific Northwest. Now that we're in our sunny season, I'm awfully tempted to pick up another pair in one of R.A.D's fantastically bold colorways because they better reflect the shoe's joyful golden retriever energy. That energy starts with the UFO's weight, which at 8.8 ounces in a US Men's 9 qualifies as light. And that's particularly impressive given the size of the shoe's midsole. The UFO's heel stack height of 42 millimeters, while technically very high, is on the low side for a super trainer and is the second lowest amongst our picks. So the shoe isn't insanely tall, but one look from below and you'll see that its midsole is very broad. Given this width, you probably won't be surprised to learn that the UFO provides a reassuring degree of stability. So even with its very high heel stack and soft and springy cushioning, I think the R.A.D UFO is among the best super trainers available today for runners who crave a plush ride and want to minimize fall risk. When it comes to attributes that can mitigate our loss of elasticity at the Achilles, the UFO features a moderate 8mm heel ball offset, which has become something of a de facto standard in the super trainer space. Now, that is a bit lower than the 10mm offset that most conventional daily trainers are built on, and in theory, a lower offset could increase strain at the Achilles. But thanks to the overall architecture of the UFO's midsole, I believe most runners will actually experience reduced loading at the Achilles and calf. One key factor here is the UFO's aggressive, full-length rocker geometry. Much like the Dynafish Xiaonian, the rocker built into the UFO's midsole allows you to literally roll all the way from initial contact on through toe-off, limiting the amount of work your Achilles and calf have to do to lift your heel and propel your body forward. A related attribute that contributes to this effect is the stiffness of the UFO's midsole under the ball of the foot. This comes in part from the sheer volume of foam under your forefoot, but that inherent stiffness is amplified by the midsole's dual-layer construction. The demarcation between the two layers is not obvious, but if I shift it in the light, I think you'll be able to make out the dividing line that runs along the length of the shoe. Both layers are made of the same truly high-performance superfoam, but the top layer that sits right under your foot is tuned to be a bit softer, while the bottom layer is tuned to be a bit firmer. This contributes to that stability I highlighted a minute ago and helps to amplify the stiffness of the forefoot rocker. The net effect of all this, the stack, the geometry, the two layers of superfoam, is a ride that feels effortless, like you could just keep turning your legs over forever. Now, there's one last thing I want to touch on in terms of ride. While the midsole features a convex curve when viewed in profile, it also incorporates a concave curve under the heel. At Nike, we used to call this sort of void under the heel a center of pressure concavity. And the intent is to use the shape of the midsole itself is to amplify both cushioning and support. As you load the rear foot at initial contact, this concavity deflects, soaking up some of the force of impact directly under your heel. At the same time, the sides of the concavity, because they don't deflect as much as the center, cradle and stabilize your heel through the transition from initial contact into mid-stance. This concave rocker across the heel is another feature that contributes to the reassuring degree of stability I mentioned earlier. Even though the RAD UFO doesn't include any traditional motion control components, the combination of its wide base, including across the midfoot, the center pressure concavity, and the shoe's full contact geometry under the arch provides a naturally supportive feel, and I believe makes it a good match for runners across the spectrum of foot strike patterns. On this topic, I think it's worth noting that I have a wonky gait that's rooted, I believe, in a leg length discrepancy, where my left leg is moderately longer than my right. As a consequence, the arch of my left foot completely collapses through mid-stance, and that foot continues to pronate through propulsion, which is a condition called late-stage overpronation. Conversely, my right foot lands in a highly inverted position and tends to underpronate. In other words, it doesn't roll in enough, and I end up staying on the outer edge of that foot through propulsion. Now, because I've had this leg length discrepancy my entire life, my body has adapted to it. But these opposing idiosyncrasies in my feet do make each side of my body susceptible to different sorts of injuries, if my shoes exaggerate those quirks. For example, a shoe that exaggerates my left foot's tendency toward late-stage overpronation invariably leads to pain along the inside of my left ankle, a condition known as posterior tibial tendinopathy. On the flip side, a shoe that exaggerates my right foot's tendency toward underpronation invariably leads to pain along the outside of my knee or hip, a condition known as IT band syndrome. While I'd certainly rather not have these issues, it is a useful thing for a shoe reviewer to have a built-in gauge for detecting footwear that promotes both over and underpronation. Okay, so what does this have to do with the RAD UFO? Well, I've worn the UFO across 7 runs, totaling 50 miles, and that included one long run of 17 miles. If I hadn't done that long run, I wouldn't have gone off on this tangent about my wonky gait, because the UFO was an unequivocal joy for the 6 other runs, and for nearly 90% of that 17-miler. But during that long run, at a bit past the 15-mile mark, I began to feel pain along the outside of my right hip, the sort of pain characteristic of IT band syndrome, and it just continued to get worse with each stride. Fortunately, I was able to finish the run, but my right hip remained very sore for the next couple of days. In a nutshell, the UFO did a great job keeping my left foot's tendency toward late-stage overpronation in check, but couldn't quite do the same for my right foot's tendency to underpronate. So the bottom line is, the RAD UFO may not be the super trainer for you if you have a history of IT band issues. I want to emphasize, though, that I only experienced my hip pain when I ran in excess of 15 miles. My second longest run in the UFO was an 8-miler, and my body felt phenomenal for the duration of that run. So this may only be an issue if you regularly run in excess of, say, 13 or so miles. All right, so that's RIDE. What about fit in our changing feet as runners over 50? Well, like all of our other picks, the UFO is only offered in medium, but I would describe it as a very accommodating medium, thanks to the shoe's highly compliant, unstructured upper. As I mentioned earlier, my feet measure as 2E in width, and I found the UFO supremely comfortable. Still, I wouldn't recommend it to folks with moderate to severe bunions, as I don't think the upper will provide you with enough volume across the forefoot. As for those with big toe stiffness, I'd offer an equivocal recommendation. The inflexibility of the UFO's midsole under the ball of the foot is going to be a big plus for you, but the width of the upper may be problematic if you're sensitive to pressure along the side of your big toe. Unfortunately, this is the sort of thing you can really only judge for yourself. Speaking of toes, the UFO's toe box does get a bit shallow, but again, thanks to the unstructured nature of the upper, this causes me zero discomfort, and I have tall toes. If anything, I think folks with very narrow feet may have the toughest time finding a good fit because the UFO's narrow U-throat opening and very closely set eye stays limit the degree to which you can cinch down its upper if it's too voluminous for you. Finally, in terms of orthotics, I measured the UFO's sock liner at 5 millimeters thick, which is right about average, and that translates to average orthotic accommodation. Now, I'm going to wrap up this review with a discussion on value. At an MSRP of $200 US, the R.A.D UFO is in that zone where I think a lot of people may wonder, can this shoe possibly be worth it? Back when the UFO was first released in October of last year, the answer for me at least would have been a lot easier. At that point, $200 was the going rate for super trainers, and the UFO offered a unique ride paired with a unique aesthetic. It was also the product of an up-and-coming brand that was bringing a sort of punk rock energy to running that I found really refreshing. So back then, I would have said, yes, the UFO is absolutely worth its $200 asking price. But today, with the phenomenal Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo selling for $170 US, and the wickedly fun Dynafish Xiaonian available for the industry-shaking price of $130 US, the value proposition for the R.A.D UFO has become less obvious. I do believe, however, that there are still runners who will see the UFO as the most compelling option amongst their picks. For example, compared to the relatively firm and propulsive Kipstorm Tempo, the UFO is the better choice if you prefer a softer, more flowing ride. As for the Xiaonian, though the shoes appear quite different, their ride experiences are actually surprisingly comparable. As you can see, both feature aggressive full-length rockers, both are thicker under the midfoot than the heel, and both give you the sense that you could just keep going forever. And yet, I believe most bigger runners will feel more secure in and generally prefer the UFO because its upper and midsole are more robust than the Xiaonians. Now, this last point is entirely subjective, but to me, the UFO also looks and feels like a more wholly considered, artfully crafted product. There are aspects of the Xiaonian and, for that matter, the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo that show signs of what's been known in the industry as cost engineering. I don't get that from the UFO. Instead, my impression is that the brief for this shoe didn't start with a price. It started with a vision, and the end product costs what it needed to cost. Ultimately, whether these intangibles are enough to justify the UFO's price premium is up to you. But as a lover of great products, I'm really glad the UFO exists. It's proof not only that intelligent life exists in the running shoe universe, but that passionate, irreverent, poetry-spewing life exists as well. That brings us to our final pick, the ASICS Superblast 3, which retails for $210 US. The OG of super trainers, the Superblast 3 shows that ASICS isn't taking their leadership of the category for granted. It's a big departure from its predecessor, and some people aren't going to like that. But over 100 miles of testing have proved to me that it is the undisputed long-distance champ. As I just alluded to, ASICS invented the super trainer category with the first Superblast, which I have here. This shoe entered the US market at the very end of 2022 and established the blueprint for super trainers that still applies today. This example actually isn't in my size. I picked it up on eBay as a reference. So I haven't had an opportunity to run in the original Superblast. But looking back at reviews, you can see that runners were consistently surprised by three attributes. First, how light the shoe was, given the size of its midsole. Second, how stable and supportive that midsole was, which enabled runners across the spectrum of gait types to enjoy it. And third, how versatile the shoe was. As Robbie Redinger wrote in his review for Believe in the Run, Because they managed to keep the Superblast so light, you really can use this as a tempo shoe, and certainly as a marathon shoe, but also as a recovery shoe, which is wild. I'm not sure there are many or any running shoes that can do that right now. Unfortunately, the original Superblast also established a very high price point associated with super trainers, with an initial MSRP of $220 US. Its price was eventually reduced to $200 US, but that was still stratospheric for a non-racing shoe. My impression is that given its price, ASICS wasn't quite sure how well the Superblast was going to be received, so they were very conservative in the number of pairs they produced. Well, word of this remarkable do-it-all super trainer spread like wildfire across the running community, and the shoe was sold out through much of 2023 and into 2024. Its successor, the Superblast 2, launched in July of 2024, and even with broader availability, it too was consistently out of stock. I can recall Reddit threads devoted to tracking inventory levels of the Superblast 2, with alerts going off whenever a retailer anywhere in the US had pairs available for sale. While I missed out on the original Superblast, I did manage to purchase a pair of the Superblast 2 when I rediscovered running in early 2025, and I quickly came to appreciate that the hype was real. The shoe was remarkably light, accommodated my wonky gait, and had that versatility to handle any type of run I threw at it, with aplomb. On the point of it accommodating my gait, the Superblast 2 became my get-right shoe. By mid-2025, I was already running in a lot of different shoes, some of which didn't necessarily align with my needs, and would leave me with lingering discomfort in my hips, knees, or feet. Whenever that happened, I would grab the Superblast 2 for my next run, because I knew it would help me get right and work through whatever niggles I was dealing with. Though the Superblast 2 featured a very tall midsole, it was not a soft shoe. Quite the opposite, in fact. And that was one of the things I came to like about it. Even though it wasn't soft, I knew it was protecting me based on how good my body felt after running in it. And I came to believe that the relative firmness of its midsole was a key ingredient, particularly when it came to stability. So when I heard the Superblast 3 would feature a much softer midsole, I was concerned. I also didn't love that ASICS inflated the shoe's MSRP to $210 US. And yet, as you can see, when the Superblast 3 hit the market this past March, I set those misgivings aside and purchased the pair. And it took just one run for me to realize that my worries were unwarranted. Yes, the shoe is very soft, considerably softer than its predecessor. And that may make it less well suited to bigger runners, particularly folks over 200 to 210 pounds. But in my experience, the Superblast 3 remains the benchmark for the super trainer category. It's not the fastest or the springiest or the most stable in its segment, but it's up there in all of those categories, making it the most versatile amongst our picks. That's why it's the shoe I've logged the most miles in this year, and why it's the shoe I chose to run my second ever marathon in this past May. And I'm by no means the only runner over 50 singing its praises. A viewer with the screen name at CMDV8N3 wrote in with the following, quote, "I'm 66 and I heartily recommend the Superblast 3 to anyone, especially runners over 50. Not only is it lightweight, fun, and bouncy, it's incredibly gentle on problematic knees like mine. It's maybe the only shoe I've ever owned, going back to the OG Nike Waffle Trainer, that actually delivers on the idea of making running feel more effortless. Absolutely worth every penny," unquote. A huge thank you to CMDV8N3 for writing in with your take on the ASICS Superblast. And really, I don't think I could have summed up its benefits any better. But let's dive into the details, starting with weight. Like its predecessors, the Superblast 3 is surprisingly light given the size of its midsole, tipping the scales at just over 8 ounces in a US men's 9. To give you a sense for how remarkable this is the ASICS Gel DS Racer 7, and it's the shoe I wore to run my first marathon in 2006. Back then, these were called racing flats, and they were indeed quite flat and unforgiving. You see, at the time, the only lever the shoe manufacturers had to pull when it came to performance was weight. So midsoles were pared down to the absolute minimum. In my size US Men's 11, this shoe weighs 8.8 ounces. Now, 20 years later, this is the shoe I wore to run my second marathon, just this past May. And as you can clearly see, it is not flat. And yet, in my size US Men's 11, it weighs only 0.2 ounces more than the DS Racer. For context, that's just a hair heavier than the weight of 2 modern pennies. I don't know that there's a better illustration of how far running shoe technology has come over the past 2 decades than this. If I drop my 2 pennies in here, now these shoes are the same weight. But it's not just the ratio of foam volume to weight in modern super trainers that's mind-boggling. These old EVA midsoles were one very small step removed from running on sheets of hard rubber. By contrast, the Superblast 3's midsole is supremely plush and protective. Case in point, I was 32 when I ran my first marathon in these, and I was wrecked physically for weeks afterwards. As I recall, it was 3 weeks before I was able to run again. Jump ahead 20 years, and I was 52 when I ran my second marathon in these, and even though I finished 45 minutes faster, I felt great at the finish and did my usual easy run 2 days after the race. Now, it wasn't all down to the shoes. I trained harder and smarter the second time around, but I am absolutely certain the Superblast 3 helped me maximize my potential during the marathon and minimize the damage I had to recover from after it. So how does it work, this magic? Well, for starters, as you can plainly see, the Superblast 3's heel stack height is very high, 46.5 millimeters high to be precise, which makes it the tallest of all of our picks. You might assume then that the Superblast 3 is also the most unstable of all of our picks. But ASICS has done a couple of clever things to counter the instability typically associated with so much stack. First, there's the shoe's geometry. The sidewalls of the Superblast 3's midsole wrap high up along the sides of your heel and midfoot, including your arch. At these peaks, the sidewalls are more than a thumb's width taller than where your foot sits in the shoe. So your heel is actually sitting about here inside of the shoe. This deep cradling of your heel and arch keeps your foot centered and supported from initial contact on through mid-stance. And this smart application of geometry is applied underfoot as well, where the Superblast 3's midsole is very broad, including across the midfoot. In fact, by my calipers, the contact patch here is the widest amongst our picks, just edging out the R.A.D UFO. The second feature that helps boost the Superblast 3's stability is the dual layer construction of its midsole, a hallmark of the Superblast line since version 1. If you look closely, you can see the dividing line between the 2 layers that runs the length of the midsole. On the medial side, it also wraps up along the arch. The top layer is comprised of a new state-of-the-art foam that's unbelievably light, springy, and soft. By far the softest foam amongst our picks. But that's balanced by the bottom layer, which is made of a more conventional foam that's stiffer and more stable. Taken together, the combination of geometry and this dual layer construction results in a platform that feels far more planted and secure than I would have thought possible given its height and softness. Support under the arch is also surprisingly reassuring and natural, and as such, I think the Superblast 3 will work for a wide range of foot strikes. Beyond stability, the 2 distinct layers of foam also contribute to the Superblast 3's unique cushioning experience and versatility. At slower paces, the cushioning feels soft and pillowy, which is great for easy runs. But as you pick up the pace, it becomes more springy, responsive, and fun, which is exactly what you want for tempo runs and on race days. Now, the Superblast 3 isn't the fastest shoe in this roundup. I give that distinction to the Dynafish Xiaonian. But if you're looking for speed across big distances like the marathon, I think the Superblast 3 is as good as it gets. Okay, let's move on to the aspects of the shoe with implications related to our loss of tendon elasticity. As unusual as the Superblast 3's midsole is in so many respects, it's built on an entirely conventional, moderate heel ball offset of 8 millimeters. That, combined with its pronounced forefoot rocker, helps limit loading on the Achilles tendon, which is going to be a boon for many runners over 50. The Superblast 3's rocker and longitudinally stiff platform also limit flex at the forefoot, which will be a plus for anyone suffering from big toe stiffness or hallux rigidus. And that's a good segue into features related to our changing feet. Starting with fit, at the time I'm recording this, no brand offers a super trainer in width. That's a bummer, especially for folks over 50 living with conditions like big toe stiffness and bunions, who would benefit from uppers with increased volume. But that said, even though the Superblast 3 is only offered in one standard width, I would describe its fit as generous. My feet measure as 2E, and the shoe was very comfortable for me right out of the box and through runs in excess of 20 miles. And those with normal to narrow feet should be served just as well, thanks to the shoe's broadly set lacing system that allows for a wide range of adjustability. One feature I really appreciated from a comfort perspective was the height of the Superblast 3's toe box. As you can see, it's nice and tall over the big toe, which can mean the difference between keeping or losing your toenails when you're running big miles. As small as this may seem, it was a big factor in my choice of the Superblast 3 for the marathon, and I still had all 10 toenails at the end of the race. All right, when it comes to orthotics, I measured the Superblast 3's removable sock liner at about 1 millimeter thicker than average. That might not sound like much, but combined with the shoe's accommodating upper, the result is excellent orthotic accommodation. Okay, to sum up, ASICS invented the super trainer category with the OG Superblast, and they're continuing to push the category forward with the Superblast 3. Its blend of cushioning, stability, responsiveness, and lightweight is unparalleled. It's not the fastest shoe in our guide, and it may be too soft for bigger runners. But for most runners over 50, if you're looking for a shoe that makes running feel effortless for everything from recovery runs to marathon race days, the ASICS Superblast 3 is as good as it gets. Even with its MSRP of $210, our viewer CMDV8N3 claimed it's absolutely worth every penny. And after 118 miles in these shoes, I have to agree. Alright, so these are the 4 super trainers we recommend for runners over 50 circa mid-2026. I'll lay them out for you in order from least to most expensive, starting with the Dynafish Xiaonian, which is the lightest and most speed-oriented shoe amongst our picks. If 5 and 10Ks are your jam, it could be your one shoe for everything, from easy runs to tempo training to race days and recovery afterwards. With an MSRP of $130, the Xiaonian also happens to be the least expensive shoe here, making it a great entry point to the super trainer category for anyone who finds the going rate of $200 inaccessible or simply insane. Then there's the Kiprun Kipstorm Tempo, which also offers a go-fast feel, but is better suited to folks who regularly run a bit longer, say 10Ks up to 10 miles. It offers an unusual balance of exceptional performance with everyday familiarity, which makes it easy to recommend to runners who want a quote-unquote normal shoe that's just better in all the ways that matter. For context, the Dynafish Xiaonian and R.A.D UFO with their aggressive full-length rockers can feel a bit unusual underfoot, while the uncommonly soft midsole of the ASICS Superblast 3 could be a turnoff for some, including bigger runners. Speaking of which, the Kipstorm Tempo is my top pick for bigger runners, and really anyone who prefers a firmer, steadier feel underfoot. Just be mindful that it runs about a half size long and may not be the best choice if you regularly do steady state runs in excess of 10 miles. Next is the R.A.D UFO, which is a mileage monster. Its aggressive, full-length rocker and soft, springy foam make running feel effortless, while its wide base gives you the confidence to go pretty much any distance. That said, it may not be the best choice if you regularly run big miles and have a history of IT band issues. But for most runners over 50, it's the shoe that's going to deliver the most miles per mile. Finally, we have the third generation of the shoe that started this whole super trainer business, the ASICS Superblast 3. It's not the fastest shoe here, but over 100 miles of testing have proven to me that the Superblast 3 is the undisputed long-distance champ amongst our picks. Bear in mind, though, that its softness means it may not be the best choice for bigger runners, meaning folks over about 200 to 210 pounds. It is also the most expensive shoe amongst our picks, with an MSRP of $210 US. Feel free to screen grab this chart for future reference. It's also available as a downloadable PDF for members of our Patreon community. See our Patreon link in the description below. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in picking these four shoes, we very intentionally highlighted options that collectively address a broad spectrum of price points and runner preferences, from firmer to softer cushioning, relatively lower to higher midsole stack heights, etc. And I strongly believe that most runners over 50 in search of a super trainer will be well served if you start that search with one or more of our picks. And yet, I know that the spectrum of runners' preferences is very wide, far too wide to be fully addressed by just four shoes. So, in the third and final episode in this guide to the best super trainers for runners over 50, we offer four honorable mentions. These are shoes that might not deliver for as broad an audience as our top picks, but may nonetheless be brilliant for runners with specific preferences or needs. Assuming I've set this all up correctly, that final video should automatically start playing after this one. But if you want to jump over to it now, I've included a link in the description. All right, I hope this has been helpful for you, whether you're an experienced, new, or aspiring runner. And if it has been helpful, I hope you'll give it a like and share it with a friend. Liking and sharing will let YouTube know that there is an audience of, let's say, mature folks out there who are hungry for content like this. And please don't hesitate to post questions or feedback in the comments. That's a great way for us to learn together. Finally, if you want to see more from us, please do subscribe. Or better yet, join our community of like-minded people over 50 who are becoming runners over 50 over on Patreon. See the description below for a link. And now, episode 3 of our guide to the best super trainers for runners over 50 will start in 3, 2, 1...